Hi, my name is Jody, and I'm here today to talk to you about my journey with my son, Wyatt, who is now 10 years old. He was diagnosed with autism at around a year old. Like many children, he was born healthy. He had an APGAR score of 10, and for me and Dave, he was our miracle child. I was not supposed to be able to get pregnant because of endocrine issues, and lo and behold, at 5 months I found out I was pregnant with a boy. And again, when he was born, he scored a 10 on the APGAR scale. The first year, we had some colic and some formula issues as I wasn't able to breastfeed. Other than that, he hit all his milestones on time, and in many instances he was very advanced. From the start, we gave him probiotics even as a young child. He ate a lot of organic vegetables and organic rice cereal. Every time I tried to introduce anything other than the rice, I noticed some issues. He said, "Hi, Mama, Daddy, bye." A year and a little after that, all of a sudden there was all these changes. He had aversions to foods that he normally would eat. He no longer wanted all these vegetables. In fact, he wouldn't even touch them. His diet was, there was a drastic change. The only thing that he wanted was anything junk. He was on a gluten-free diet because he didn't seem to tolerate any glutinous grains at that time. There was always a reaction. His bowel movements were regular, and up until this point, and then all of a sudden he would have this foul-smelling liquefied diarrhea. His butt cheeks would burn, and they would become a cranberry color. A digestion that wasn't this normal, healthy boy all of a sudden lost abilities to do anything. The little words that he did have disappeared. All of a sudden he started developing repetitive behavior, opening, shutting doors, slamming them over and over, moving a car back and forth, fixated. We did have gluten-free foods, but the only ones that he gravitated towards were any that fed candidal, fungal. At that point, his behavior, he was happy and a loving, caring, kind, and a well-behaved child, exceptionally behaved child, even at that age. And at this point, he was very fussy, just beside himself. It's like he was not happy in his own skin anymore. Tantrums, meltdowns. He no longer pointed at things. Mama, Mama. It just disappeared. And at that point, everything happened so fast, and there was like a lot of disbelievement within my family and people that knew me. No, you just might be too much of an anxiety-filled mom. You're just too anxious. You have too much time on your hands. You must be just imagining things. Well, I wasn't imagining things, and I didn't back down. At this point, I obviously took steps. We went to his family practitioner with our concerns. We got a new doctor. They ran labs, all kinds of tests. They didn't know what was going on. They had no answers. 10 years ago, they didn't know what they knew today about autism. There weren't as many theories or interventions. At that point, I remember being up till 2 and 3, sometimes 4 o'clock in the morning every day, researching everything out there possible, like probably a lot of parents have. What was autism? What caused it? What created it? I researched everything. Metals, pollutants, diet, family history, vaccines, adjuncts, toxins, How could a normal, healthy, developing baby become so ill? And of course, as today, that is still a great debate. I'm not here to debate why or how. This is about my son and his healing journey. So we didn't get the answers. We didn't get the support from the medical world. They didn't really know. A lot of it they just ignored. We actually had him blood tested for gluten and dairy sensitivities, and it didn't show up on their thing. So I went home and gave him a clean organic cereal that had wheat in it. And his body turned purple and cranberry and mapped all over. And I remember calling the emergency room and bring him in. He can't be having a reaction like that. Whatever. At that point, I felt that we were on our own. It was a lot of issues of abandonment for both myself and Dave. Your family turned your back on you. But that didn't stop me. I was determined. And one thing that I knew was I wasn't supposed to have children. And I was given this child. And to me and to Dave, he was in the same circumstances. And to us, he was a miracle. And I always had this belief, and I still do, that he was a miracle, and that child was mine for a reason. And I also knew that he was not given to me to remain ill, and that he was not given to me to be sick, that that wasn't God's plan, that he had something bigger in mind. And with that being said, I persevered and pushed forward. I went back to school for human services and early intervention to learn everything that I could, and I researched and researched and researched everything. And there are so many different treatment modalities for children out there, but one thing that stood out to me is we weren't rich, we didn't have a lot of money, and whatever I did had to have a great impact. And one thing that was very important would be that it had to be non-invasive, as natural as possible. With that being said, nutrition. Nutrition was key. I was able to make connections, and we were able to talk to some great naturopathic doctors. With support and learning from a lot of naturopathic doctors, a lot of research, extensive research, Wyatt was put on a very clean diet. He was supported. We supported his detox pathways, gave him a lot of superfoods and nutrition, and we had early intervention working with us at that time. And that was very rough. They would come and work with him, and they tried to teach him the PEC system or sign language. To see your son throw himself on the floor and beat his head off the ground was not very nice. But that happened frequently, and my stipulation was, if he's going to sit there and beat himself off the ground, then you better be supporting him. And I remember that day where the lead early interventionist looked at me, and I said, what is his prognosis? Where are we going with this? And she looked at me and she said, I'm sorry, but your son's never going to speak. And she said, I do not feel that your son's going to have much of a future, that he will be put in a home where he gets 24/7 care. He will never live independently. He will always have to have aides and supports. And I don't know what else to tell you about the future of that boy, but it's not good. So their goal at that point was to try to teach him at least either the PEC system or a sign language to get some kind of communication from him. At that point, I knew the value of it, and I know that these systems are valuable, but I didn't want nothing to do with it. At that point, it was like me and my son had this silent communication between us, and that's all I needed. I got his needs met. One thing that was clear between me and Dave was that we never gave up, we never lost hope, and we always had that knowing that somehow, some way, he would heal. One thing that was a big factor was when he was developing normally, he was in the 85th percentile for both height and weight. And after this ordeal, he slipped down into the 20th percentile. As far as the nutrition and Wyatt and his health, his digestion was horrible. He didn't process food. He always looked like he was 6 months pregnant for a little boy. His food would sit in his belly and ferment, and he had dark black circles under his eyes. His bowels would go from chronic constipation to diarrhea. From the early intervention, he transitioned into a inclusive preschool, and all the while we continued taking this natural approach. Wyatt, at 5 years old, had regained some speech through extensive nutrition. I researched everything possibly out there, and his nutritionally was supported in so many ways. And we did this up until he was about 4 years old. At that point, I had it set in my brain that he would be totally healed by the age of 3, and then he turned 4. And yes, he had made gains. He had gained some speech back, and he was able to make some friends, and but we had other issues going on where he was very anxious, anxiety-ridden, very OCD, very repetitive, very stimming, and then he would have these episodes and flares that a lot of kids are now referred to as pandas. Current strep infections that would recur over and over and over and over again. And at that point, we went to some professionals, and he did sequential homeopathy. Initially, he had some very good gains there as well, and we were very happy. He was a very good responder. But then nobody knows why, and nobody knew why at that point, but he stopped responding. And in fact, he took a drastic dive. But alongside that dive, I took a dive. My health, I had my own health issues. And throughout this all, it's kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back, and I was very ill, to the point where I didn't know if I was going to make it or not. And Wyatt went right down that path with me. And at that time, we were clinically diagnosed, both me and Wyatt, with having Lyme disease and other co-infections like Bartonella, Babesia, Epstein-Barr. From there, we were supported with the Byron White formulas. They gave us hope. They got us on our feet. They gave us some strength. But one thing, something was just not right. Something was missing. I was introduced to quantum techniques roughly when Wyatt was about 6.5, maybe 7 years old. And at that point, I had a practitioner do a few things with myself, but I wasn't bought and sold. I didn't know much about it, and at that point I was looking at the physical aspects of everything. From that point on, it had been hammered into my brain. It was all about the virus. It was all about the name of the disease. It was all about what little itty-bitty thing were we dealing with. Was it strep? Was it this? Was it that? Was it a fungus? And what is a non-physical field? What is a how could something like that have any impact? I don't know. So primarily it was ignored until I had some issues that really needed to be addressed by quantum techniques. I didn't know where else to look, and I started with quantum techniques. I started having treatments through quantum techniques, and I was doing the Byron White formulas, and I started doing some research looking into quantum techniques more. My health was very fragile at that point, and I was willing to try anything at that point. I needed to be here for my son. I needed to be strong, and I needed my son needed me. At that point, I saw Carolee's name, and Live Nutrition. She had a background as a master herbalist, and she was a naturopathic doctor. And I knew at that point something that I had always wanted to learn about was raw nutrition. More about diet, beyond the gluten-free curtain, more beyond just being dairy-free. The first time that I called Carolee, I was a mess. And Carolee didn't know much about me, but I couldn't breathe. So, hi, how you doing? And then I just seized up. And Carolee just started working through me, and I was able to breathe. And the reason I couldn't breathe and I was hyperventilating was because of my son. At that point, he weighed 42 pounds, and he was 7 years old. He had the body size, and he looked to be that of a 3 or even some 4 years old. It was not acceptable. I didn't know why all these things had happened and had gone wrong. He had made so many gains on so many levels, but yet was so very weak and still such a fragile place. And same with myself. At that point, Wyatt was not able to go to the bathroom. He had chronic constipation that was so bad. He was getting water enemas 2-3 times a day just to try to get anything to move. We weren't always very successful. He had herbal pills to help him go to the bathroom. Sometimes 2 and 3 of these pills that were very high strength. He wouldn't move. Whatever went into his stomach didn't digest, it didn't break down. It was as if time stood still, and all these things that work like a mechanism of a clock weren't out of sync, and they just didn't move. He weren't processing anything. How could we do all of this stuff and still be in this position? And Carolee says, I need to treat Wyatt. Let's ignore you for today, and let's treat Wyatt. And Carolee went in and she looked at Wyatt's digestion. And it was they were trauma fields. They were non-physical fields. They were issues of abandonment. There were issues regarding, he was blaming himself for some of the things, for me and his father's upsets, for causing problems within the family. She removed these blocks, worked through the traumas, and got the field, and within an hour he went to the bathroom on his own. And I need to say he was 7 years old, and he still wore a pull-up because he could not go poop on his own. He was 7 years old. He finally became potty trained about 7 months earlier, and he ditched urinating in a pull-up at that time, but we couldn't get the bowels down. I mean, it just didn't work. So he was still in a pull-up, and he went to the bathroom on his own, on the toilet. And that day he went 3 more times. And I'm sorry about this subject, but in that day he went about 4 feet of poop. 4 feet. I knew at that point I was on the right track. I know in my heart I was meant to meet Carolee. And I know from that day on, he was age 7 and he is 10 now. And I can tell you now, we have never given Wyatt another water enema ever. From this day on, his bowels have worked. He poops 2 and 3, even sometimes 4 times a day. He has regular bowel movements. Once in a while he'll still get a stool softener, but his bowels are working. I continued my work with Carolee, with both myself and Wyatt. And as there was, in that first 6 months, there were so many changes in my son. He weighed 42 pounds. He looked anorexic. He was basically failure to thrive. He had no fat reserves whatsoever. His skin was dry, it was scaly. He needed work. And at that point, It was all about nutrition, back to nutrition, but I learned even more. It was about diet, beyond the gluten-free. With quantum techniques, everything is tailored. It's not about a gluten-free diet. It's not about a paleo diet. It's not about, I'm skid, look at me. It's about what your body needs. What does his body need? What did his body need to thrive? And that's what it was about. And Carolee would help me with that. What nutrients was he deficient? What did his body need? And thankfully, I was blessed with having great cooking skills and ability in the kitchen. So, whatever he needed, I went to the kitchen. What does he need? The other thing was, we're still working with digestion and the pyloric valve in his belly, getting that distended pregnancy look to calm down, to come in, everything. Remind you that the digestion works like that of a clock. If one piece, one part is out of sync, it is not going to work the way it needs to. And foods are going to ferment and they're not going to digest. And Carolee would work with me on this. And so, superfoods, nutrient-dense foods. What did he need? Bone broths, whether it be chicken or beef, organ meats, liver, concentrated nutrients, small amounts going in. Carolee got me on some really good superfoods with him. Dr. Schultz, superfoods, amazing. Within that first 6 months between my diet and in the kitchen, rehoning my skills and feeding him these foods and working with her, he gained 10 pounds right off the back. And by the end of that year, Wyatt had gained 20 pounds. He went from 42 pounds up to 62 pounds in a very short time. I have never seen anything like it. It was total amazement. Also, there were many other gains that happened throughout that time. So many parents seem to be focused on what are the food intolerances, what do we need to avoid. We didn't sit there and say, Carolee, we need these foods back. What happened is, as we broke these traumas down, as we broke these fields down, all of a sudden, all these foods were coming back. Wyatt had so many tactile issues. There are many foods he wouldn't touch just because he couldn't stand the way it was in his mouth. And I'd be in the kitchen, and I'd have to do 2 and 3 different suppers for dietary issues, differences within the family. And all of a sudden, Wyatt would come to me and say, that smells good. What are you having for supper tonight? And I can remember the first time, after working with Carolee, 6-7 months, we were having chicken thighs, baked chicken thighs, a baked potato, and some kind of vegetable. And Wyatt says, I think I want that for supper tonight. And I just about cried, because anybody that has a child with special needs or autism knows that was a landmine, a marker of something big. And I said, sure. And, you know, of course, Mama, why are you upset? Mama, why are you crying? Nothing. These are tears of joy. We'll have chicken tonight. And from that part, more and more inclusive moments like that became normal within the family. Even today, there are many things like that happen. Things you would never expect anybody like him would ever want to eat or try. We even had some scallops this year for the first time. That was pretty remarkable. Carolee is an excellent practitioner, and she's also an excellent teacher. And throughout this course, it's been 3 years, and I worked regularly with her for the first year, and as time progressed, my appointments spanned out more and more as I learned from her, and I picked up the ability and had training myself in the quantum techniques. I just wanted to make a few additional comments about some of the progression that Wyatt has made. He never learned to read until about 2nd grade. He was homeschooled, and all of a sudden it was like he went from A to Z with his reading. You'd never know that he didn't learn to read till he was in 2nd grade. His comprehension is very high level. He operates in that department probably 4 to 5 even grades above his 4th grade level on his comprehension. He's a very bright, smart boy. His fine motor skills with his schooling were very poor. I had a hard time, you know, doing any type of writing. His hand, just to write his name, was just about excruciating. They just didn't have the strength or the ability to do so. And I can tell you, he has beautiful handwriting. Beautiful handwriting for a kid his age. And wow. The other things that were an issue with Wyatt were some of his gross motor skills, having the coordination. I can remember being in preschool, and it was so disheartening for Wyatt. They wanted him to hop on one foot, and he couldn't do it. And because of quantum techniques, because of his healing and this journey with them, a year ago Wyatt said he wanted some additional courses outside of the home. So we hooked up with a local private school for gym and some other extracurricular activities. And he came home to me showing off in the living room doing jumping jacks. And he says, "Look what I can do now, Mama. It's easy. Don't you know all the kids do this?" And he just, he's showing me and his father doing jumping jacks, and which is, for anyone that has been with a child that has autism, coordination isn't always very easy for them. And I can say, I wasn't a believer, and now at my last appointment that I had with Carolee, I said to her, when I met you, you told me I needed to go back to my roots. And I was very insecure about going back to my roots and what that really meant. And it was about the nutrition, and it was about what I knew, and it was about diet. And she was right. And I give a lot of thanks to her and the founders of quantum techniques. With, looking back at those early days, I said to myself, what did I do wrong? It wasn't about what I did wrong. It's about what I didn't know. And I clearly know now that the missing piece was in fact quantum techniques. And why is quantum techniques so important for me and my son? Why was it so important for the healing? Because these traumas, these emotions, these fields that were so strong and so powerful wouldn't allow the body to see. The body didn't know. It was being misguided. All of a sudden, blinders were put on and it couldn't see to heal. Wyatt was on some of the best supplements that I absolutely know for parasites. But yet when he met Carolee, his body was overridden and hidden with parasites. How could he be overwhelmed with parasites when for so many years he was on all of these supplements that dealt with parasites? How could he have such a problem? Well, his body couldn't see. There was these trauma fields. For those of you unfamiliar with quantum techniques, by trauma fields, I'm talking about events that the body were very traumatic. For Wyatt, some of his trauma fields, especially through the homeopathy and stuff, why did he revert? Well, number one, I was sick. That was a traumatic event for Wyatt. Two, one time we were with my mom and we pulled into the yard, and half of a 75, 80-foot pine tree snapped and came crashing down on my mom's car. The guide wires bounced the tree and broke some of the fall enough that we weren't killed. The first responders, everybody that showed up at that day, they don't know how we made it through, but I do. It was the grace of God, but it was very traumatizing. Can you imagine being a 4-year-old boy witnessing that tree literally tucking into the windshield right where me and my mom were sitting, and the whole car was bounced up like this. So anybody can see how a 4-year-old would, or actually even an adult would represent as a trauma, and that was a major blocking field for him. Other things, when you're high need, when you are sick, you have a lot of special needs, and Wyatt thought he was a burden and a letdown to his family. The shame of the diagnosis of autism in itself. All of these things represent blocks to him and things and hurdles that he needed to get over. I just want to say right now how grateful I am for quantum techniques, and I want to thank the founders for developing this and being great teachers and able to pass this on to other people. Carolee is not only a great practitioner, but an amazing teacher, and everybody could benefit from this, even if you don't think that you need it. The healing benefits are unbelievable. I want to go to current day. I felt Wyatt weren't still assimilating nutrients like he should. And it was roughly maybe 2 months ago where I said to Carolee, can we look at that? And we did. And it was still, you know, testing at about 40%. And me being very determined, I'm not a person to take no for an answer or to give up very easily. And I treated Wyatt with what I knew with quantum techniques and what I've learned, and through diet, each and every day. And every bit of his food, what was going to help him heal, what was going to push him over, help him move forward, and what does his body need. And again, we drove down that. And this last time when I talked to Carolee, I said, can you go back to that place and tell me how his intestines are doing? And Carolee said 100%. And I said, what did you say? And she said 100% assimilating. And she says, what are you doing? And I said, well, taking care of my son. You know, just diet. To me, diet and nutrition are key. And the big and the big thing that I want to emphasize here, more importantly than the diet, is quantum techniques. Each and every day, I checked the nutrient assimilation factors. What were the blocks? What was in the way? Were they physical? Were they non-physical? And each and every day, I looked at those points to see what was in the way. And of course, of that time, he went from a 40 to 100% assimilation factors. And since that time, just in a short period of time, he's put on a couple more pounds, and growth, which is, he's always been on the shorter end, like me and his father, but he's been growing. He's a little impatient in that field, but he's growing, and he's thriving, and he's a healthy young boy. And I just want to, again, last year he finished up the school year, taking a couple courses with a private school, and I had a knowing at that point. I thought he was ready. He came to me and he told me he was ready, and I believed he was ready. And the one thing that happened at that point was he was a boy. Not a label, not a diagnosis, not a child that could be picked apart every which way and told what wasn't adequate enough. But he was a young, healthy, loving boy that entered that school. And that is how he entered that school. I didn't have questions. I didn't have teachers calling me up or saying he needs this or this service or that service. And over the summer, I was reacquainted with an old friend, and she's a mother of 6 children, one of the pastor's wives. And she looked at me and she said, autism? Health issues? I don't know, Jody. I don't see anything. And he was out there playing with his 6 kids, and she looked at me and she said, if you would have not told me anything about your son or what you or him have gone through, I don't see any of those things. And for me, as a mom, as a healer, what more could you ask for? that somebody of their own accord that is well versed in the developmental ability and timelines of children to come to you and say, he's amazing, he fits right in with your kids, and everything was spot on. And I just said thank you to her that day and smiled. I don't need to convince anybody what my child had or didn't have. For my family, we have our son back. Here at this pause to say thank you to my mom. She's taught me a lot of things throughout my life, and that was, no matter how low I dipped, no matter how sick I got, that woman supported me each and every day, and she was here all the time throughout both mine and Wyatt's healing. And she taught me a lot about perseverance, and no matter what, sticking by and having faith. And that allowed me to have faith in my son and to never give up and to continue to have the strength through Wyatt's healing. And I also want to say thank you to his father for staying by both me and Wyatt throughout this journey. We've had a lot of ups and downs, but here we are today on a up, with both me here and Wyatt with the health we have today. And now I'd like to introduce my son so he can take a minute to just share a few words so he can have his camera time. This is my son Wyatt.
Hi.
I just want to take a minute to discuss with him, or maybe you, a few of his favorite foods. Some of the foods we've introduced lately are cultured and fermented
Pickles.
Yes, he is my pickle man. Do you like pickles?
Yes, I do.
Yes.
Especially the homemade ones you made.
Yes. Cultured pickles are a big thing in this house, and they're good for your gut. Also, we've had some other yummies.
Like homemade gummies.
Yeah.
Raspberry and blueberry.
What kid doesn't like gummies? And another kid favorite?
Marshmallows.
Who doesn't like marshmallows? Most people think of marshmallows as just a stretchy thing full of high fructose corn syrup, but really that's not what they are when you use good wholesome ingredients.
Thank you, Carol Lee, for how much I have healed. Boom!